Welcome, everyone. We are the National Association of Adoptees and Parents, and we're proud to bring you another happy hour edition for everybody in the adoption constellation. And we're excited to have our guest, LC Coppola, here tonight. We'll be introducing LC in just a moment here. But just as a reminder, the National Association of Adoptees and Parents has as its mission unifying the adoption community and elevating our diverse voices by promoting dialogue, understanding, and healing through education, awareness, and connection. My name is Greg Gentry. I'm a domestic infant adoptee from the baby scoop era, and I'll be hosting tonight. And again, as I mentioned, we're excited to have LC here. And right before we do a formal introduction of LC, Beth, do we have any housekeeping items? And could we also see, again, yeah, these are our bylines or bylaws for how we operate the space here. Please remain on mute. Please raise your hand on screen or virtually to be recognized, and that comes up again during the Q&A session later on. You may post your questions or comments in the chat, which we always invite. Our guests do receive a copy of the chat. They can see the great dynamic interactions that are happening there. And a reminder, if you are experiencing a serious mental health event or suicidal thoughts, please contact a licensed professional or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by dialing 988. And also, this is a public meeting with no guarantee that information or identity is confidential, and portions of this event are recorded and may be shared in our private happy hour group on Facebook and on our YouTube channel. Any housekeeping, Beth?
Yes, I want to remind everybody about the programming that NAAP brings to the adoption community every month. We have happy hour on the first and the third Fridays of each month. Greg is our host on the first Friday, and then Patricia Knight-Meyer hosts on the third. Now, this month, March, we will not be having happy hour on the third Friday night because many of us will be at Untangling Our Roots Summit, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But normally, first and third of Friday night, you can find happy hour. Next week, Amy Seek will be leading First Families, Birth Parents Journeying Together. They meet the second Thursday of each month, and that will be happening next month. We finish out each month with Dr. Liz DeBetta's program, Migrating Toward Wholeness, Rewriting Adoption Narratives in the Constellation, the fourth Thursday of each month. And then normally each month on a Tuesday, and it's usually the second or the third Tuesday, Dr. Joyce is with us for Putting Yourself Together After Reunion. She will not be hosting that this month because, again, the summit. But you can see that NAAP has lots of programming for you to be involved with on a monthly basis, and we are so happy to have those opportunities. Okay, the summit. I'm going to talk briefly about that. Well, if I can get it to come up right here. There we go. Okay, March 19th through the 22nd, NAAP will be hosting Untangling Our Roots with two other organizations, Right to Know and DNA Angels. This is the third time we have brought the adoption, donor assisted reproduction community and the NPE, non-paternal event or non-parent expected, however you define that for yourself. The third time we've brought these three communities together for this really, really powerful event. And it will be in Atlanta coming up in just 2 weeks. In fact, 2 weeks from now, we will actually be there. You can still buy tickets. You can still make a hotel reservation. At this point, you will need to make your reservation directly with the hotel. The block has closed, but there are rooms. I got on this afternoon to make sure that you can still get a room there. There are all sorts of ticket opportunities. This says available through February for early access to the full event, but I'm pretty sure they are extending that $339 clear up until almost the actual event. But you can go for the whole time. You can bring a significant other. You can come Thursday night, Friday only, Saturday only, whatever. There's all sorts of things that will work into your schedule. So I will be dropping links in just a minute into the chat for all of these different things. But We always have t-shirts every year, and there will be some of the old t-shirts, but there will be some new ones this year. So this is just a glimpse at the new t-shirts. You will be able to buy a few t-shirts there. We don't carry a large inventory at the event, but you can order ahead of time and then have your t-shirt to wear. So again, that link will be dropped in just a minute. So it is a great event. There is still time to go. There are still hotel rooms. So if you have any other questions specifically about it, feel free to drop a message to me in the chat and I will see if I can help you with that. And that's it for me.
Great. Looks really exciting. And I can say that having gone to two Untangling Our Roots events, there's a lot of really great stuff happening there. Just the interaction with people and then the great offerings for people to attend some really important and influential speakers in there. And so I hope that you would avail yourselves of that, those of you who are interested. So at this point, I'd like to introduce tonight's guest, Lisa LC Coppola. Is a licensed therapist, writer, educator, and creator of the Voices Unheard storytelling program. She is the founder of Coppola Counseling and Consultation, LLC, based in South Portland, Maine, and brings lived experience as an adoptee in long-term recovery from addiction. LC specializes in helping people navigate any stage of search and reunion and in the intersection of adoption and addiction. Her writing has appeared in Severance Magazine, Chicago Story Press, The Fix, and Adoptee's Voices. In 1922, she authored Voices Unheard, a reflective journal for adult adoptees. And I'm really proud and happy to have you here, LC. So welcome to Adoption Happy Hour.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
Yeah, I feel
Yeah.
like
Mm.
so LC and I are in-person friends, and had the advantage of having a lot of really great conversations. And she seems like somebody who with her pulse on what's going on in a therapeutic sense, and also as somebody who's writing and making really important content. Just somebody I think you'll really benefit from hearing. So, LC, we welcome you to share about your story, if you'd like to do that.
Thank you. Sure.
Sure.
And I'm also excited about going to the conference in Atlanta. So I just wanted to, I've never gone, so this will be my first year. I'm excited to meet people there, meet some new faces, and just like go to a big conference like that. I've never done something like that. So yeah, I talk about the four losses of the adoptee a lot, and the one that has been on my mind so much over the past few years is the last loss, which I call it just the loss of self-trust as an adoptee. I used to I used to kind of focus on like the loss of self-trust through disenfranchised grief, the loss of self-trust that we have grief, but I feel like it's more than that. So Greg and I have been having some interesting conversations over the past little bit about it and like digging into it. So I kind of gathered my thoughts on my own experience trying to focus on self-trust and my ongoing recovery from, I'd say, in recovery from addictions and chronic self-doubt. I'll say that for this talk. But so yeah, I figured we can start with my just sharing for like 10 to 15 minutes on this. I wrote a few things down. And then Greg and I, we can talk, and then maybe I have some discussion questions we could maybe open up for people. All right.
Yeah, that would be great.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this community. So it's really so nice to see some familiar faces, people I haven't seen in a little bit too. All right. So as an adoptee, for me, self-trust has always been really fragile. I grew up without, like many people here, I grew up without mirrors, biological mirrors, not just physically, but intellectually and emotionally. And I didn't know where many of my traits came from. So some of my traits for sure I I collected, I guess, from my upbringing. I have a very dark sense of humor. I have a really easy sense of creating community everywhere I go. My adoptive parents always had the coffee pot on. There was always like random people at our house. I feel like I want to say this too. They were just like diner people, and they just always had just like they knew everyone everywhere they went, and I loved that. But there's some things in me that are very alien to the family I grew up in. Like I've always been super philosophical, a meaning maker, very creative person. Sometimes I feel like I have so many ideas that it almost feels like I'm just popping them out left and right. And I've had to learn how to organize these ideas. And this wasn't understood in my home. It was kind of like I was just all over the place, I was just like, my parents weren't like that. So I've really had to get to know how to work with this brain and this personality and this body that I never saw reflected anywhere. Um, and in my childhood, I'm a Department of Children and Family Services adoptee. Um, so that means that I wasn't through a private adoption. I was through the DCF, and my brothers also were through DCF. None of us are related. My parents had an emergency foster home. When I was young, we had kids coming in and going out of my home. So just a very chaotic environment. Parents very blue collar. My dad worked in a factory. My mom taught first grade. And my parents also ran the Open Door Society of New England. So our home growing up was like a support group for adoptive parents. Um, my parents were both very adoptive parents were both very much like camping, fishing, fly tying, learning to do things outdoors. And I liked those things. I really liked building forts, for example, and collecting frogs. I actually had like a collection of 28 frogs in little containers behind our trailer. And I named each one with a permanent black marker. I know we have a vet in the room. I don't know if this is if this is bad to do for a frog, but each frog had a permanent black marker so I could remember who they were. I also wrote philosophical like guides, and somewhere in my backyard in New Hampshire, there's about 20 of them buried. This was things like my parents didn't know what I was doing. Um, so that was happening. And at the same time, I also truly believed that I was irresponsible, up to no good, a total space cadet, because these were the things that sometimes I was told, not rarely, by my parents, by my teachers. And I was really impulsive as a kid, shared my daydreams and my nightmares with everyone, very no filter, worried about people dying all the time, generally worried all the time. I couldn't focus in class, always getting in trouble, became much more almost like I adapted to that. I am irresponsible. I am a space cadet, which I thought was a good thing for a while because I loved astronauts, but turns out not not the best thing. Um, and I ended up developing compulsions to relieve these feelings that now I know are anxiety, grief, the hypervigilance in my body that's been there the whole time. But I just felt like, you know, I look back now and I'm like, wow, I was a really philosophical thinker or creative. But back then I was like, I'm not doing it right. Like I'm not doing whatever everyone around me is doing right. I don't, you know, and another thing Greg and I have been talking about recently is I've kind of looked into some studies on this is you recognize the traits in you. No, people recognize the traits in them. We inherit traits biologically. We inherit personality styles, not entirely. I mean, some of the things are not from our roots, but we see strengths in others that we have in ourselves. So like my parents weren't necessarily, saying, oh, you're crazy for writing maps of imaginary lands, but they weren't like, oh, this is amazing that like this is a strength of yours. If they were doing that, they may have been more apt to recognize that strength, is what I'm trying to say. Um, okay, and they had their, I felt like there was a small part of me that knew my strengths, but that part was very small, very quiet. I felt misunderstood a lot. I felt ashamed a lot. I was repeatedly tested for learning disorders throughout my youth. No one ever talked to me about early relational trauma or adoption ever. So I was like, my brain's broken. That's how I framed it, in my head. And my adoptive parents also had their own childhood stuff, but it wasn't the same version of childhood stuff that I had. And what I mean by that is adoption trauma. And what I mean when I say that, when I'm talking about adoption trauma, I'm talking about major early loss and the ways that our stress response systems formed to that experience. Like that's what I mean. So they didn't understand that. And I did not understand that for a very long time until like years into being a therapist. Um, and it feels so important to be understood for anyone. No one can be 100% understood in the world, of course, but I think for adoptees, it's really important to acknowledge that for much of our lives, we were square pegs trying to fit in these round holes. And as one client of mine years ago said, if we get into reunion, we're there trying to fit our now warped and contorted pegs back into the other holes. So it's just um it's a lot of it's self-doubt becomes chronic. Um and also, we are encouraged in a lot of ways, movies, TV, friends, sometimes our adoptive parents, not always, sometimes other people like teachers to feel that we're lucky, that we're gifts. Um, so much of the world sees adoption as mostly beautiful without recognizing these losses. And we are encouraged to do so as well. So we suppress and we don't trust our natures, we don't trust our grief. So for me, alcohol and drugs came into my life as a teen and quieted much of that shame and anxiety and grief away. I didn't realize any of this until I got sober. The part of my personality that was natural and true, that creative, curious part of me kind of got dulled for many years. I became very, like, totally just a relief-seeking missile in order to not feel my feelings. So I will break some anonymity in a way for a moment and say that a 12-step program did save my life. I've been sober for 16 years. I still attend meetings. I go mostly for community and to help others and to also remember that I cannot drink. In the beginning of my recovery, I had to learn and accept that my mind and my thinking at the time couldn't be trusted. So another thing I had to, it wasn't like, the solution is self-trust. It was more don't trust your mind because I couldn't trust my mind because my mind said you can just have a few. Remember that time 5 years ago you had three, only three? You can do that again. Um, you can get sober another time. Like you don't have to do it tonight. Like that's what my mind said to me constantly. Uh, so I had to learn to distrust that voice, what I now have come to call my addict part, because it's not all of me, it's this part of me. And I had to learn to distrust that. And that message I heard in those rooms was life-saving around that. But recovery doesn't stay in its first year forever. And then as the years went on, I stayed sober. My adoptive parents passed away, which was incredibly sad for me because I was close with them, but they did have certain perceptions of me that didn't align with who I really was. So it turns out I'm actually incredibly responsible. I'm like the friend that people rely on. I never thought that would be true, but you know, I'm responsible, I'm loyal, I follow through on things. I built a business, I wrote things, I created storytelling nights and workshops for adoptees. And I have a lot of motivation, and I actually have gotten really well at organizing my thoughts and my time management. I'm gonna stop bragging about about myself now because it's embarrassing, but I just had no idea that that was in me. And I think the distance from kind of I just, I felt like I was almost like raised in this way where I couldn't trust what I knew was my strength, and then I didn't develop the self-trust. So I couldn't get to the point of being responsible, if that makes sense. Over time, I worked with a sponsor who was really trauma informed. Took a while to get one who was like that, but she reflected my strengths back to me. She really got to know me. I began to see that like my brain wasn't broken, my thoughts weren't all wrong. I could trust myself in many ways. But in the rooms, I still heard these messages like, do the opposite of what your mind tells you. Or this one, your best thinking got you here. So there's this message that's important for these newcomers in these rooms, but not for someone who's like healing and integration is like essential about, creating self-trust, which is everyone really. It's not just adoptees. Um, so this message became very complicated. And, you know, when I talk about rebuilding self-trust, it's not about, or building self-trust. It's not about blind trust or listening to every fearful thought. That's another part I have problems with, is discernment. It's really like it's taken a turn to like become this journey of learning to differentiate between protective, fear-driven parts that can harm me and the wise, empowering part that knows my strengths. So learning to trust our own perceptions might be one of the most essential stages of healing. That's something that I've really been thinking about, especially the past few years. One of the hardest tasks for me continues to be discerning when it's fear speaking or when it's intuition. It's like hard for me to know when the situation actually requires vigilance. Like, for example, when someone's walking on slippery ice or swerving to avoid an accident. Um, that does require hypervigilance or vigilance. But when it's intuition, when we need to listen to our intuition, there's more of a sense of flow and alignment. And when I override that, which I do a lot, it's like I'm forcing something that's not right for me. It feels like I'm abandoning myself. I have stayed in really, I've stayed in relationships, friendships, romantic partnerships, work situations where I have ended up like chronically emotionally drained and dysregulated. And my intuition may have given me signs years in the beginning, but I overrode those signs. First, I hoped the situation, the people would change. And then when that didn't happen, I would tell myself that I was too sensitive, that this was just my trauma response, that much of what was happening was my fault and I should change, or that it was a fear response. And in recovery, the rooms of recovery are often told to look at your side of the street, which I do, and I will do my side and your side if you let me. Um, so and I often, have had people in these relationships reinforce this message. You are too sensitive. You are, too much. So what was happening is I think that I've gotten into these things where I'm like trying to minimize a feeling of subtle danger instead of listening to that quiet signal inside me. The one saying that this is wrong and I really should consider changing course. when we're babies as adoptees, placed with someone other than our biological mothers, we cannot change course. We must adjust. We must ignore the signal. I also want to note that reunion helped me with self-trust, even though in many ways it's been extremely difficult. The traits in me I talked about earlier that I didn't find in my surroundings growing up, I did find some of those in my biological family. I felt much more like a real, true person and not an imposter trying to be real. I always joke with Greg about this, and I didn't know if I was going to say it today, but I have cankles. I have cankles, okay? And I always was like so embarrassed of them. I'm like, I have these like crazy, whatever, like it's just a body part I don't love. And it's weird because I don't know, like no one has them around me. And then I saw a picture of my birth mother sitting on a fence, and she has them too. And then it wasn't this mysterious, horrible flaw. It was a thing that runs in my family. And the relief of that was amazing. And that relief was also equal, it was the same thing when I was like, oh, my birth mother has a million creative thoughts going through her head, and she also has this like open heart that's gotten her in trouble a lot in her life. And my birth biological father was a counselor. He thought in similar ways. There was a lot of dark stuff in my reunion too. It definitely was not all great, but I felt like I was able to find like trust with my body, mind, and soul or whatever through reunion, even though some of it was dark. And I had to make that choice to be okay with finding that dark stuff out too. Um, okay, so there are still times in my life where these fearful younger parts of me want to act on the idea that everyone knows I'm bad or irresponsible, or that no one will be able to keep me because I'll be too much or I can't be trusted. And if I listen to those younger, fearful parts, I won't heal or integrate. I'll continue to suppress and shame myself into submission. This is unwarranted hypervigilance and fear. And if I act on it, I've learned that I might actually create the evidence, the very evidence that I'm worried about. For example, I might suppress my feelings because I'm scared of being too much, and then shock people that I'm around when I actually finally have them. And then I'll take their reaction as, oh, I am too much. But they're just shocked because I've been suppressing. So, another example is like I might this is one I definitely do. I over explain myself because I think everyone knows that I can't be trusted. Um, And then the people are like, why is she over explaining? She's up to something because and then I'm creating the problem. I'm creating the problem because um, my fearful perceptions become reality. So I really have to and I have spent time growing these wise, intuitive parts of myself. Um, my wise part tells me I am exactly how I should be for everything I've gone through. I'm evolving and I'll continue to evolve. I'm someone who's not afraid of change, and I'm not afraid of taking my part in things. I am compassionate and loving and deserving of love. And this part of me knows that I'm someone who's impulsive by nature and hypervigilant due to trauma, and that this needs to be taken into account when I'm making any decisions that require decision making or thought. Um, so the self-trust thing is a little bit at odds from recovery from addictions a bit, because initially recovery requires distrusting the addict voice. But healing or integration requires a willingness to learn how to hear our intuition more easily. And this takes a lot of ongoing practice. All right, so I'm going to end with like a little bit of a thought experiment that I kind of jotted down. I hope it works. But has anyone waited tables here before or bartended or carried a tray? No. Someone had to. Maybe I don't see anyone. Well, there's a lot of people not on their screen. We'll assume some people. Well, when you carry a tray,
Yeah.
some people? Okay.
I bet they have.
Okay.
Sure.
You can't look at the tray. You can't look at it. If you look at it, you're going to spill the drinks. Like you have to just walk and it's smooth and you balance the tray intuitively. Your body just senses the wilt and the tilt and the movement. And really, if you look at that, those drinks are going to spill. I've done it so many times. So that's what I feel like is a metaphor for intuition. But then the metaphor for hypervigilance, I said it earlier, but it's more like walking on a slippery sheet of ice. In that moment, while we're walking on it, we really do need to pay close attention and brace ourselves and watch the ground. If we're not doing that, we could easily fall. If we did that with the tray, we would spill the drink. So it's like the challenge has been in my life. Now I'm seeing it more clearly, learning to trust myself to recognize which situation I'm in. Am I in a carrying the tray situation or am I in a walking on ice situation? So, okay, and I have these discussion questions I can just kind of put out there. When in your life have you mistaken hypervigilance for intuition? Another way to say that question is, when have I or when have you mistaken fear for wisdom? And maybe vice versa. And then the second question is, how do adoptee narratives or the world or the cultural narratives around adoption complicate this kind of discernment?
Yeah.
Good, thank you.
Those are great questions for people to
I could put them in the chat if you want.
yeah,
Can I put them in
let's put them in real quick if we could. I might be able to get them in there too if you need. I think I have them written down. And then what we can do is when we go to the Q&A session here in several minutes, we can have people weigh in on how they've assessed their own answers to these questions. Those are really
I got them. I can put them in.
oh great.
Oh, no. Hold on. I'll do it. I'll do it. Okay. There we go. All right. Got them.
There they are. Yeah. If you can take a look at those questions, everybody who's looking at the chat, and if you'd like to weigh in on that during the Q&A in a few minutes, then that'd be a pretty good conversation, I think. I feel like, first of all, I took a million notes, and unfortunately, the biggest piece of paper I had were these little tiny tablets. So there's about 15 of them. I love taking notes while the guests speak because they just fire up things to think about. And always when I listen to you, um, you're always full of the best analogies and the most practical ways of saying things that are so relatable. And so it's like I'm writing, I'm going, oh, I'm not going to be able to catch everything. I wish I could. But I did get some, and I wanted to see if we could talk about some of these things because you hit on these amazing points and how they inflected your own story the way they did. And this topic of an adoptee trusting oneself. I don't know what's more relatable to me than a question like that. And for so many reasons that, you and I have discussed, one of them starting at what was it like in my family? And we talked about that. And it was the same situation. Wasn't that I wasn't experiencing love and enrichment. I was different. And I don't think that was well understood or well acknowledged, other than a kind of, oh, you're just too smart for us then, I guess, sort of way. And so there was this kind of gap, a distance, and it was kind of lonely in a way. And one thing I do remember hearing, probably more than I should have, was use your head. I remember hearing that in my
Mm.
mind. And so I internalize that so deeply. And I say these things that you've been talking about saying too, which is you're like, I can reflect to other people why I'm no good at things or why I can't reason well. I have that whole construct in my head built up, just like you were talking about here. And then you talked about discernment, though. There's a time where you're listening to these different voices in different contexts, and they're telling you things that maybe, like for instance, in the recovery context, means something different at the beginning of being in recovery than a person in a different place in life and maybe with a different experience. But what do you think about this idea of discernment? That sounds like it's kind of difficult to develop in somebody or to believe you can have it for yourself.
Uh, I feel like it's like a daily, like I don't know how to it. I feel like it's one of those things that you have to keep practicing. Like I don't know if you get it down. I think
Yeah.
maybe it gets easier, but I do feel like it's hard to, I mean, it's hard with, you know, um, one of the things that I struggle with discernment is I get into situations that are chaotic a lot. I always have one, I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I always have kind of like one chaotic friendship or romantic relationship just like hanging over here, like almost like I need it or something, like I'm addicted to it, and I'm trying to figure out how did I do this again? Like I was so careful. I even wrote down the red and green flags in the beginning and I made a checklist. How is this happening again? Um, but I think I'm getting better at it slowly. These things take time. I hope I am. I think I am. I think I'm not needing as much evidence before I leave, but it's hard, when, I also grew up in a very chaotic family. It wasn't just it wasn't just adoption stuff. It was also, being in chaos a lot. Like that was normal. So, yeah, discernment of like, is this situation emotionally safe? Does it have to be absolutely devastating for me to leave? Like, when is the right time to leave a friendship or a work situation or a romantic thing? Like, when do other people leave it? I mean, these are conversations I have with people a lot. Like, I try to ask people who seem to not get into those situations how they did it or how they discern
Yeah.
right away.
You talked about about the suppression piece that started with it involved grief, it involved your talents, it involved the recognition in yourself of being a really creative person with ideas that just kept streaming out. Uh, I feel like uh, the fact that you said even you hadn't trusted your own nature in a way,
Mm.
and then the role that the reunion did play in helping you see things like that. And I've felt that flood of relief in something similar of just the connection. It's so hard to explain to people why that's so meaningful, but it completes something. It doesn't heal all things. It doesn't make everything all right, but it does seem to provide something that you can say, so that's why. And
Mhm.
by that, you aren't saying you know the ultimate reason for something, but you know that somebody else has something like I have. Maybe
Mhm.
they don't know the ultimate reason or derivation of it either, but they have it too. And just not
Mhm.
being alone at that point, whether
Yeah.
it's the physical characteristics, or and for me, there was a lot of body stuff. Finally looking like somebody when I met them. It was also the intellectual traits. It was the disposition. I remember sitting in the car with my birth mother, and my half sister in the front seat, and I was sitting there talking, and my now ex-wife said, all of you mumble, you're all mumblers. I thought, isn't that interesting? Because we could all hear each other, but somebody else thought we were all just kind of talking.
Yeah.
So even basic things like that, they
Yeah.
just provide so many things. But yeah, I feel like you mentioned healing and integration, though, that does come when you do need to learn to trust that inwardness, that part of you.
Yeah.
And you have that context of the recovery that you were talking about. And it must just be so difficult to hear. I can't trust that voice. I know what that's
Mhm.
going to do, or I should know what that's going to do, but I need to get to a point of trusting this part of my other voice, and that must be a very difficult balance.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, there's so much to say about the recovery world with the messages because, I mean, there's a part of me that wants to say, well, like 12-step programs were created, you know, back in the day by religious, I don't, originally it was like, I believe it was religious. I'm not sure, but don't quote me on any of this stuff. I see Wendy shaking her head. Maybe I'm wrong. Um, but I feel like there's a lot of like stuff on like ego and entitlement. And what a part of me wants to say, like, I think that as adoptees, we could use a little more of that generally, a little more entitlement to be in the world, a little more ego, which means self. It's not always bad, you know. Um, but it's the wording, you know, it's just the wording. It's if you're concrete like me and you take it, if you take it, you know, what they're talking about is like narcissistic entitlement or like, um, and that's really what they're talking about. But if you're just hearing the words and you're hearing some of the notions that maybe aren't like helpful, you could really get stuck in this like everything I think is awful or um you know,
Yeah,
stop thinking that kind of, I don't know. It's hard.
yeah, this kind of obverse of this lack of trust in ourselves, the mistrust, right? And then this idea that everybody should know this about me, right? I got to get the word around, or you probably already have heard that I don't think well, I don't reason well, I don't come to the right conclusion, whatever it was for me.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, and then like you said, you kind of can create that, right? Evidence for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, and it's not every adoptee either. I truly do
Sure.
believe like we've all developed these different defense mechanisms and they don't all look alike. That's, you know, like some of us developed over entitlement or, you know, I don't know, like so it's like it's not so black and white as as I would like for it to be, so it'd be easier. But for me, I've had to be like I do belong here. Like I've always felt like, well, thank you for inviting me. You know, like um, and it's been more about I belong here. Like I can trust myself. I'm not
Yeah.
doing something wrong all the time. You know.
And you mentioned being a relief-seeking missile. That was a really profound way of saying this, right? It was like all of the directness and the things that you were doing, looking for some kind of respite or some kind of way out of the heightened state or whatever you want to call it that you were experiencing.
Yeah, the heightened state. Yep. That's how like, you know, when I was 2 years sober, I was a mess. I was just constantly connecting every thought to the next thought, monitoring my situations, worrying about everything I said and did and everyone around, like just floods of worry and exhausted. And it was clear why I was drinking, because that's what it was like before I started. I just didn't know. I had such a break from it because when I was drinking, it went away, and then I would be focused on my hangover. That was my life for over a decade, you know.
I wondered if you could, one of the things you said here about was the infant who couldn't change course. And
Hmm.
that just kind of really hit me. So like we were this way for those of us who are infant adoptees, infants placed in adoption. You said we couldn't change course. We must ignore the signal, I think is what you
Yeah.
said.
Yeah.
That's amazing. It says so many things. And this is one of the reasons I feel like you have this amazing way of communicating things to even larger audiences that are not used to thinking things this way. They just want to argue about adoption as a good, and you're talking about, or maybe they have, some of them heard about trauma, but they haven't heard probably something like this. The infant can't change course.
Yeah, there's so much to wade through before you can even get there because
Yeah.
this isn't about, for me, I think I'm like adoption reform. I'm a realist. I don't think we're gonna live in a world where we're gonna solve all the problems. I just doesn't seem, I hope so. I hope we can continue making steps there. But this isn't to even get to that conversation. It's like what we're not talking about is like shaming anyone other than maybe some corrupt agencies and countries and stuff like that. But we're not shaming, it's not about guilting people or making adoptive parents feel bad. This is what happened is like you were shifted from your biology and everything that was familiar, and your stress response system was rapidly forming right at that point when you were taken from the heartbeat, the sound, the smell. And that's what happened in the beginning. And if we can understand that, you know, that caused like the formation of like your stress response system, to put it more scientifically, like
Yes.
it's if we can understand it and acknowledge it, um, that's a good place to start. As adoption doesn't, I mean, I don't know if it's going to completely go away if unless we solve all the problems of the world.
So I guess one of the final things I wanted to ask you about here before we move on to Q&A and get to the people who've raised hands, um, is moving from feeling irresponsible, moving from feeling like a space cadet, developing compulsions, and
Mm.
coming into an awareness of what was going on after, coping strategies, et cetera. And he said it took years into being a therapist for you to understand some of what was going on here. Do you have recommendations for people who maybe are coming into an awareness of things like this, or where they might be able to turn for some insight?
Yeah, I mean, I have a on my website, I have like a list of resources. If you go to the adoption tab, there's a lot in there. I love Adoption Unfiltered, the book and the podcast. Um, it's an adoptee, a birth mother, and an adoptive mom, and they just talk about lots of topics that we've touched
Yeah.
on tonight, but just like the realization of all this stuff, and in the book there's like a ton of different, interviews and stories. I also like Nancy Verrier's Coming Home to Self. I actually really like that. It's the adult
Mhm.
adoptee grows up, or the adoptee grows up. She
Yeah,
wrote
I
The
read part of
Primal
that.
Wound, but this is the second one.
Yeah, that one, I got much further in that than I did in the primal wound.
Yeah,
I had a
yeah,
much more visceral response to the primal wound, but
100%. Me too.
and I think there's looking at the gallery here, and I know one person in here who said something similar. Maybe we'll hear from them in the Q&A here in a bit. But Yeah, so people can look at your webpage then you're saying, right? And go into finding under the adoption tab, number of resources or recommendations for materials, content to look at.
Mhm. Yeah.
Great. We did put some of that in the chat here, how to find you. But
There's
where
some
else can
great
people put?
interviews of Greg Gentry on there too, or at least one. And maybe you telling your story at Voices Unheard.
That's very kind.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that for a minute if we could. The fact that not about mine, but you host, you bring adoptees together to and other now you've expanded a few um you reach a little bit here in the most recent one, but the experience of Voices Unheard, which was a really unique thing for me to even find out about. But what was it like to form something like that that's been so meaningful for a lot of people?
I mean, I was so great. I really like Boston Post Adoption Resources. I used to work there for like 7 years, and they helped me do this workbook, and they helped me form this, they let me and Maya Rogers Burson start this storytelling night, and now they let me take the program with me.
Mm.
So they are, I felt like I don't know, check out their website too. Um, I felt so supported by them, and I just felt like telling, like writing our stories or even writing just essays, it really forces you when you're writing memoir to like know who you are. It really is like about learning who you are, your voice. Because good writing is your voice. It's not, well, this is, I guess, my opinion, but it's your voice. It's not you're pretending, if it's memoir. It's not like becoming all of a sudden this amazing flowy writer. It's like how you think in your head and who you are on paper. And so when people are able to like do that and then share it, and then there's adoptive families in the room or friends and people who have never heard, who they really don't understand this stuff, and then they're like tearing up and they finally get it, and like a light bulb goes off and they're like, oh, it's a huge deal. Like
Yeah,
it's a huge deal that you were separated from your biological roots and history. Oh my God, why didn't I see that before?
yeah,
You know? Like for me, it's adoptees coming together 100%, but also it is about getting understanding, like so our loved ones can stay connected to us and understand us. Our loved ones who aren't other adoptees. That part's
yeah.
just as important to me.
And you've
And
written the workbook too with the
yeah.
same photos, right? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a workbook that's like a journal that BPAR helped me create back in 2022. And you can run groups with it. There's a few adoptees that I've started some groups, I think. But this year, last year was the first year we decided to, well, we is me. It was kind of me and Maya. I'm not going to pretend it's like a whole board making decisions. It was kind of me that decided, like, I've just met, there is no place, unfortunately, especially in Maine, for adult adoptees or for people that are discovering like DNA surprises, like taking a test and then they're learning that they're adopted as an adult, or that their father, who they thought raised them, wasn't their father. And so the night is also open now to anyone with that experience as well. We only had one person last year with that, but so it's adoptees plus.
B plus, yeah. It's very meaningful night and brings out some of these great writers, and some of whom are represented here. I see them.
Yeah.
Wow. So LC, I want to thank you
There's
very
several
much for
people. We
coming.
have Bruce here.
Oh
Well,
yeah, yeah.
we
There you
have
go.
Alette is here.
Yep.
We're here, and Wendy. Am I missing any?
Yeah, it's great. I love to see the support. It's always exciting when um, hosting someone on happy hour or in fireside, etc., to see people show up and support. They want to hear, and shows the influence you've had for positive things in a lot of our lives. And again, you have a really great way of communicating and getting across ideas that are reflected on a bunch of little 2x2 pieces of paper right in front of me that I've got to find a way to put together now. But I wanted to say again that yeah, I really wish I could spend more time exploring some of these things, but I'm having this assimilation issue of just pulling all of this together. But I wanted to say that I'm sure there are other people who are feeling something similar, but really appreciate you coming out, and didn't know if you had any last words you'd like to say before we turn to the Q&A session.
No, I mean, thank you for having me, and I'm just really glad to be here, and I appreciate everything you do as well. And I don't know. I don't really have anything else.
That's as great an ending as anyone can give. And for everybody for coming and supporting and just hearing LC, maybe you're just getting to hear her for the first time. I hope this was a really insightful event, because there's just so much wisdom in there again, and so much thoughtfulness in the way you share your ideas. So we really appreciate you here, and good luck at the conference coming up. That's exciting that you'll be there, and hope that will be a great experience for you as well, and for other people who will be attending. And for everybody, we look forward to seeing you at other events for NAAP. And in just a minute here, we're going to end the recording and then turn to a Q&A. I know some people have had their hands up for a while, and appreciate your patience while we get to this piece of the event. So everybody stay on the Zoom, and we're about to end the recording, and we'll talk in just a minute. Thanks.